Hello, everyone. My name is Fiona Marks. Welcome back to the channel. I am overjoyed today to be recording my very first after party show for the Vedic Astrology podcast. Episode 2 just launched today, and I am super excited to have with me Ida and Sachin, and we are going to break down this episode and talk about the things that were controversial or that we enjoyed or that we want to know more about. So before I get started, I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome my guests and ask them to say hello and introduce themselves. So Ida, can I ask you to say hello to everyone and say a little something about who you are and what you do?
Hi, everybody. My name's Ida Alaviun, and I am a pharmacist turned astrologer. I know. So I love all this talk of all the science and cause and effect and everything, because that's very much where I come from. So yeah, I'm very pleased to be here, delighted and humbled to be on this podcast. And you can actually find me at thecelestialyou.com. And so I pass on to Sachin.
Yeah, thank you, Ida, and thank you guys for tuning into this podcast. Thank you, Fiona, for calling me, for making this happen. And my name's Sachin Sharma from Sachin Astrology. Astrology is my swadharma. It's my sadhana. It's um, it's a consequence of the totality of my being since the first moment of from my birth to this moment in time and space. And I'm gonna uh, just do my be myself here and just see where Fiona takes us on this special Vedic astrological ride.
Thank you so much, Sachin, and thank you, Ida, as well. Thank you both for being available for this panel discussion. And so let's have a look at episode 2. The title of episode 2 was, How Does Astrology Work? The Scientific Context of Vedic Astrology. And this episode was very clear to me that it was something that I needed to do if I was going to run a podcast called the Vedic Astrology Podcast. It was like a threshold that you have to cross, is answering the question, how does astrology work? And it was not something that anybody's ever explained to me. And I found that really strange when I started learning astrology, that we didn't spend the first something of however many lessons talking about how does astrology work. For you guys, did anybody ever explain how astrology works to you?
Yeah, so I
Go ahead.
Yeah, I go ahead. And so basically, I don't know. I sort of started figuring out astrology through, I think most of us do, through our own birth chart, and we just stumble upon astrology, and then we start exploring it as a with this much of skepticism and this much of faith, and then it goes like this.
Yeah. Exactly so.
Is that what happened for you as well, Ida?
Well, okay. So for me, it was, I didn't personally feel like I was on my, following my dharma. I really just didn't feel like I was on my path. And I was actually in a lot of physical pain. So I have my Saturn's not in good dignity in my birth chart. So everything's sort of like, get it together. So for me, it was really literally just, I had gone to therapy actually to try to figure out what was going on, why I wasn't happy in my job. And, then I decided to try something else. And so you could go to therapy every week, or you could just go to maybe a couple sessions with a really good astrologer. And it is just so much more effective. So for me, it was
Yeah.
seeing it in my own life. And of course, I wasn't expecting astrology to be real, you know. I was just like, oh, you know, let me just. But the more I kind of exactly like dug into it deeper, I was like, well, I'll be damned. This actually works. And so every day has been like that. I mean, I still feel that way. I'm like, oh my God, you know, like I'll be reading a chart and go, does that resonate with you? And they're like, oh my gosh, it resonates. And I'm like,
I totally agree. And I thought that was a private experience because I didn't come to astrology having used my chart or had a reading. I just came to learn the discipline. And so I thought it was me privately that was like, wow, this stuff works. This stuff works. And then the more I talk to astrologers, even if they've been practicing for years, they still get that kind of tingle of, wow, how is
like
that?
the joy of it.
Yeah.
It's really addicting.
Yeah.
It's like a little dopamine hit, you know, you're like, oh, yes, it's right. It's okay. We're going.
Yeah. So it's interesting what you guys are sharing with me, that perhaps why this is not explained generally is that people who come to astrology have had an affirming experience with their chart already. Like an astrologer has successfully communicated something, and therefore when the person comes to learn astrology, they're already on the more or less astrology works page. Whereas that was not the case for me, because I haven't really read my chart or have had it read. So that's why I wanted to see if I could put together an explanation and an exploration of the topic. And let's go through some of those themes today. I'm just going to share the screen for everyone so that we've got a little something to guide us. And of course, now that
I want to back up here, because how did you get interested in astrology if you hadn't had your birth chart read?
I know, exactly. I think it was probably I think it was the passing of my mother. I think that she probably wanted to study astrology. She was quite a student in her own way. And I think that life, maybe her early life gave her a limited sense of what she could achieve in life. And so the older that she became, the more she realized she could do whatever she wanted. But maybe it took a long time to do that. And she had 5 children. So it's hard to do whatever you wanted when you're raising children. And then when she left the body, I think that maybe something just passed over a little bit. Because also I say this because Ryan gets us to write papers as part of the assessment. So we're always writing case study papers. And every paper that I wrote was for a British royal family member. And my mother loved the British royal family. She was English. She went to the coronation. She didn't go to the coronation, but the coronation happened when she was a young child. So it had left an impression on her. And I found myself, now you can ask me about, you know, William and Harry and Charles and the Queen, and I know them. But when I started astrology, I was like, I don't even know who these people are. So that's my hint, Ida, but I don't know that for sure. Maybe it was just time for me to wake up to that. And I didn't need my own chart.
It you know, it comes down to, I mean, divine intervention in whatever way.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Where is this screen? It must be this one. Yeah. Okay. Now, finally, okay, everyone, I'm sharing with you now the chapters of our podcast. And I have an intuition actually to do this backwards. So Sachin, you've got to go through your notes backwards now. But let's talk about the very last theme in the podcast, which was around I think he's a maths teacher or a science teacher and an author, sharing this idea that as scientists, we're on a tree of knowledge, but we're investigating the leaves and the branches, and we're trying to work our way towards the trunk, but we haven't quite got there yet and we don't know whether the branch that we're on is the whole trunk of a tree, or whether once we get down that branch, we're going to find a bigger, a thicker stream of knowledge that connects us right down to the roots. Have you heard that analogy before? How did you respond to that analogy? And maybe I'll ask Sachin first, just so that you know who to talk first.
Yes, so I go first.
Yeah.
So I think it's a perfect analogy because it explains the whole theory of complexity, complex theory about paths and holes. So tree as the with its root and stuff, it's the whole, but the, with there are the leaves and there are the roots and there are the branches and then there's the flowering and the whole process, and those are the parts. And one cannot say that the tree is complete without the leaves, and they cannot say that without the trunk the leaves can exist. So the part requires the whole and the whole requires the part. So the tree analogy is, I think it explains it quite nicely, and I think that's how fractally, micro, macro, cosmically, things manifest. Even thunder, if you look at anything in sacred geometry as well, which has been, as you know, part of my investigations. That's how it is. Like we've been. The ordering principle is such. The tree explains. It's not just a mere metaphor. It's it's the poetry of science. Like it's the underlying poetry of science which allows for science to happen.
Beautiful. Thanks, Sachin. Ida, did you resonate with that tree of knowledge example as well?
I think it's this idea that we have gaps in our knowledge. So there's like, we are just trying to get it together. I love the thought of fractals around that, because actually, if you look and you tear apart the and kind of peer into the fabric of the universe, so to speak, then yeah, you see that there are all these individual pieces, but they fit together. And really, we cannot start from the trunk because we don't, as humans, have, I believe, the knowledge and the capability to start there. So we have to, put this piece over with this piece and then sort of work our way. And certainly, I see that in science all the time, where a lot of times they're just guessing, and to be honest, or they'll do, because I'm a pharmacist, I'll see, like, with the trials that they do, they'll start to use one drug for a certain disease, and then they'll find actually it does this other thing. So, that's finding your way to the trunk. So, and it's a kind of a meandering sort of process, but in a way, aren't we all trying to find our way to the source, to the trunk?
Yeah. I love what you're sharing there about medicines that were patented for one thing and become really effective for something else. But I also, one of the things that, for the reason I think I'm attracted to Vedic astrology, is because in my experience, so what I had an experience with that was really convincing, not about astrology, but it was about Ayurveda and Vedic science. And so I find that Vedic science has that trunk not through that scientific investigation method that we're familiar with, but through the deep silence and meditation and contemplation thousands of years ago, when we were in a different yuga and we were perhaps closer to the galactic center, if that's what that is a description of, when our minds were able to connect more clearly to that truth. Vedic knowledge has been able to pass down through this very difficult time in history where we're all being dragged more into our karma, and things are becoming more difficult and more, those malefic planets really getting their claws on us. But at the essence of Vedic science is this interconnected knowledge of all life, and is very comfortable with Vedic astrology and medicine and yoga and your diet and mathematics and the rules of how we live and how a country should be managed. They're all connected because it does have that trunk and those roots. And I always feel like I want to call on you to say something more detailed about that. But do you also see that Vedic knowledge does have that trunk and the roots?
Yeah, there's a knowledge with a small k and a knowledge with a capital K. You see, so when we're talking about the Vedas that a scholar refers to as a mercurial Veda, is the Veda which is understood by the intellect. And the intellect is just one planet, Mercury, and Mercury is the earth element, which is the most grossest thing that you can see, the most physical thing, which is, and those are actually ideas and concepts which we feel are very subtle from our current state of consciousness. We feel ideas and concepts are very subtle. They affect us in this reality a lot. But the knowledge with a capital K requires that silence with a capital S. You see, so we need that. Well, that's the technology, as you use that word. That's the technology we need, because here, when we are using philosophy from Mercury's perspective, it's about Gemini, and which is about trial and error, experimentation, hobbies, having fun with ideas and stuff. And then there's the Virgo side, which is about argumentation, proving your point, being right, overcoming obstacles, and making something better than before. So Mercury acts with relativities. When we're talking about astrology, we're talking about absolutes. So it cannot be falsifiable. So it cannot be scientific. Astrology can never truly be scientific. We we need to change the definition of what being scientific means. We need Harvard, Stanford, and all these institutions who are like the uh, uh, let's say the authority on science. What is it to what does it mean when we say science? So they define the rules, and then it's the same as what religious institutions are doing. They have their own rules to define religion with whatever. Like, I don't want to take names. With, let's say, His Holiness telling us about Buddhism and Pope telling us about Christianity and stuff. But those are the rules, and then we have these renegade sort of dilettante people who are astrologers, right? And within astrology community, we have like these scrapers, uh, we have the scholars, and then we have those who are enlightened. So I'm going on, like, I'm creating like parallel chains of lines. I'm using the tree and the leaf analogy in my speech. But what I'm trying to say is that uh, the whole method of knowledge, the whole method of knowing something, which is science, means to know, the word itself, to know something. We are inherently scientific. Every child is a scientist. Now, what the definition of science is what's given to us through culture, but our inherent nature as soul is exploration, to experiment and to know. So we are all scientists in that sense. Now, what are we trying to know, will come with its own rules and its own philosophical presuppositions, own logic, its own category of logic. Its logic will have its own fallacies, its own rules, its own ethics, morals, depending on which point you want to reach. So something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sachin.
No,
Yeah,
that actually
I'd
really
love to
resonates.
hear what you have to say, because you've come through the scientific method, and you've earned your living in that space. Yeah, so tell us your perspective.
Well, oh goodness. As I'm hearing this, I'm going, yeah, because actually, I discovered astrology within my Mercury Vimshodari dasha. So, like, of course, right? So for me, I'm a very exploratory kind of astrologer. I can tend to be, I want to learn everything at once. So this is something that I struggle with, but absolutely, yeah, it's been an evolution. For me, the scientific methods and the study of pharmacology, I came from a medical family, so lots of nurses and doctors. And so they were strong believers in kind of this establishment. And what happened to me is I had kind of like these assumptions that all of this would work and okay, great. Actually, what happened is as I went into pharmacology and chose that as a career, very quickly I started to get sick. And what I had autoimmune disease. And it wasn't something that the establishment could cure. And so it's kind of like saying, okay, you were brought, it is very interesting too, because I was brought up, my mother is an atheist. So I was brought up, in that vein of science, atheism, like really very evidence-based. And it just didn't work for me. It just physically, like I was ill because I wasn't listening to, my inner truth. And so this idea of Vedic astrology being foundational and really having kind of like tapped in to the source information, when I originally studied Western astrology, they just didn't have access to that sort of organized, well thought out, pervasive and comprehensive knowledge. So when you find that in Vedic astrology, it just blows you out of the water. And that's kind of what happened to me. And really found out that the limitations of the scientific method, I found out personally in a very visceral way.
Yes.
Like, okay, why am I in so much pain?
Yes.
If this works, and not to say that it doesn't work for some people, it does, but it didn't work for me. And I think that was on purpose. I was meant to question this and say, okay, wait a second, maybe this doesn't work for everybody. And so what else is there? And so also asking the question of, well, if this doesn't work for me, what else is not true? And therefore, what is true? And so that was kind of like the evolution of thought. And I just found that Vedic astrology just tapped in to what I felt was the truth.
Yep. I agree with you, Ida. I had that experience not with Vedic astrology, but with Ayurveda, that I had been raised like super healthy, Western raw food, organic food, lots of salad, Australian, very healthy, active. And it was just killing my vata. I just didn't, and my pitta had completely gone out. I had no digestive fire, and I just kept shoving cold raw food into my body that was really raw and healthy, but my body couldn't, but if you said to anyone on the street at that time, we're talking 20, 25 years ago, what are you eating? And, I was vegetarian and fresh food and all this kind of stuff. They'd be just like, oh, that's brilliant. You must have so much energy. And when I went to my first Ayurvedic coach, he was like, milk. I was like, how dare you say the word milk? I can't consume, milk and comfort food. And, let's get this digestive fire, and within, 24 hours, it was a complete transformation for me.
Wow.
So similar to you, Ida, that one's body can really be a truth teller. And as Westerners, it can take us a long time to listen to the truth of our body because of this scientific thing, the way that we in our culture do validate and esteem some kind of peer-reviewed, level of knowledge. And wow, you guys are the experts. So if you tell me that I should eat this, or you tell me that I should exercise like that, then regardless of how I personally experience it, that must be correct.
Although this has nothing to do with astrology, I think we could have a totally other podcast about the misperceptions of diet and, because I had the similar journey as you. And it was a situation where I actually had organs taken out of my body. So until I started listening, it was it was a rough Saturn return, let me tell you. But
yes. Bow down to you, Ida. I mean, and that's the thing. We have the capacity to listen and learn. And life is happy to present the suffering until we're ready to listen and learn.
Oh, happily. And it was also, it was a very interesting thing that I'll point out too, because I had my doctors, I have a GI disorder. And so I had my GI doctors saying, oh, actually, food is not correlated to this disease. And I'm thinking, I'm not the smartest tool in the shed, but how does that even make sense? Yeah. It's like sometimes you have to stop and go, well, I know there's no placebo double-blinded trials here, but let's use some common sense.
So then let's talk about something that is in the podcast then, and both of you have touched on it. And I think, Ida, you were saying something about when one first asked the question, well, if that's not true, then what else is not true? It's like you can begin to open up. And there were a few things that I researched in the podcast. And I guess maybe the main thing I was trying to achieve was to help us open up, because I think sometimes people close their minds to astrology because someone's told them it's pseudoscience and they've read a horoscope in a magazine and just gone, well, that's not credible. Yeah. But then there were a few examples that I thought were really interesting. And I don't know which one to pick, but maybe, the one that comes to mind is this idea of cause and effect, that we get really indoctrinated to sequential cause and effect, that this happens first and this happens second and this happens first. So as a consequence, this second thing happens. Like we're kind of taught to view life through that paradigm. It's so fundamental to maybe the way Westerners think. And then that great Quanta article that was kind of saying, actually, that's holding us back now. Like it was good for maybe such and what you're saying, those mercurial things that we can research, that we can dissect and we can put in a microscope and all that kind of stuff. But there's big things like, time, gravity, space, like these big things. We can't get there through this idea of sequential, one causes another causes another. And Ida, was that something you wanted to speak about, actually?
Yeah, and actually something just came to mind. I'm probably going to butcher this. There was a study that they did, something about correlation versus causation. And I think it was a hot day on a beach, and the sales of ice cream had gone up, but also there were more shark attacks. And so does the eating of ice cream cause shark attack? And it's like, I don't think so. So yep. Causation versus correlation. And so for me, I think I really saw the Western medicine approach kind of degrade in some ways and fray at the edges. And that's because I get to see what happens after the trials. So when a drug is studied, they do rigorous testing and all this stuff, and they say, well, it's a significant improvement. That might even be just 5% improvement, right? So even significance is sort of toyed around with. But then when you introduce that drug in actual patients, we, the pharmacists, get to see what happens. And what we saw is that it was never representational in the actual population. And so, yeah. And so, I mean, some drugs do function well, but it was never to the level that was achieved in the studies. And so, you know, there was all this sort of like speculation of, well, were patients just not adherent with their regimens or this kind of thing in real life situations. But what I was seeing is that patients were reporting more side effects and just not having the resolution that they wanted for the diseases that they were facing. And so with overwhelming, you know, anecdotal evidence on a daily basis, it changes your mind about, you know, what's really cause and effect there. And so I saw that kind of like fray at the end and at the edges. And, you know, even with the studies and the rigor that we do have in that system, we really aren't getting to the effect necessarily. And so really ask the question there that maybe you can't get there from there. So
yes, maybe that path doesn't lead there. Yeah.
Right. So okay, this is tried in this study, and then this is here, we've marketed it and everything, and it's now in the public. But it's actually not a straight line. You know, it's logical, but you can't get there from there. No. So sometimes when you want to get to health, it's not a straight line, and therefore it can't really be. It's not that easy. There are more factors than we know.
Yeah. And astrology is great for that, actually. But I'm not going to go into that tangent because I would love to hear your thoughts on. I guess we're talking about here questioning those paradigms of cause and effect, or the way that we're taught to think about the world. Is there anything that you wanted to share about on reflection to the podcast?
It's super interesting because that's the infinite regress that there's something called infinite regress, where we go into a loop with something. And that's the infinite regress of the article that you had shared. Like you arranged this meeting, so we are in this meeting, or we can say we were supposed to be in a meeting today with you, so you had to arrange it, right? Yep. And infinite regress. And the philosophers hate it. Philosophers hate infinite regress because there's no conclusion to it. And that's when you start encountering, again, I've been studying a lot of complex theory. So how complexity works, how transdisciplinarity works, multidisciplinarity works, and interdisciplinarity works, how you need to, how there's value in everything in a certain context. So for example, I've been trying to study atheism. So I'm reading books on atheism, even just to know the perspective, you know, and just to know that, and it's very convincing. And I'm an atheist, I feel now, not in the sense that how atheism is defined by the masses, because I'm not a believer in that. I'm an atheist. So that's where the complexity comes. So
I love this. I
start thinking. So anyway, like, I don't want to make it too complicated. It's very overwhelming for us to understand anything of a causality in our causal experience of reality right now. We cannot discuss it. It's beyond astrology. A causality is beyond our paradigm. A causality requires something completely different, which is a very high spiritual practice, you can say. So that's out of question. If I tell you they're both green, actually they're no color. Actually, this and this, these two are the same things. So this, even saying it, creates some friction within me because we are dual. We work with duality. We have a sun and a moon.
Duality. Yeah.
We cannot process it. Now, when it comes to causality, there's we our current perspective is linear. Reality is linear. That A happened because A happened, B happened because B happened, C happened because there were apes and this whole Darwinian structure of reality on Newtonian scientific paradigm. Now, this is completely, you can call, um, it just doesn't work for certain, it works for certain things, and we cannot go against those things because it works in that framework. Uh, uh, what Albert Einstein says and what certain other scientists say, like how relativity theory doesn't agree with certain other theories, but they're both true. Like quantum physics and relativity have some inherent disagreements and stuff, but they both work for their own things. So if it's the same question on a simpler level as did the chicken come first or did the egg? And how certain masters explain it is that the egg and the chicken came together. The chicken is within the egg, and the egg is within the chicken.
Yep.
The tree is the seed, and the seed is the tree.
Yep.
And so we have to fundamentally work with that's the basic philosophical presupposition work with paradox, which is making sense of nonsense and making nonsense of sense.
Yeah. No, agree.
I think we're progressing very well in that this afternoon.
Exactly. You know, because so there's this one French philosopher called Edgar Morin, and he just turned 100 years old on the 8th of July. So I've been waiting for his birthday, and I like had a little celebration within myself on that day. Like, that and Professor Edgar Morin has he has like 6 or 7 PhDs, and he's done a lot of transdisciplinary work. He has in fact like coined this sort of push this word forward, and he's like the leaves of the tree, bringing back that analogy, are not communicating with each other.
Yeah.
So as Ida said, that doctor did not know that there is a correlation between food and stomach. You know, and listen to yourself, like create a loop, like put a pipe here and put the other end of the pipe in your own ear and like listen to yourself. You'll realize that uh, the leaves are not communicating because leaves are not willing to go back to the branches. So, for example, psychology and biology communicated through philosophy, through epistemology and stuff. So they had to come back and we created another branch, which was evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology. So now this interdisciplinary work is happening. For example, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to integrate Carl Jung, Professor Jung's work, and Jyotish, and they're extremely compatible. The
Yep.
problem with Jyotish is that we don't have a psychological framework for it. So it's mostly metaphors, and it'll work. It works, but then if someone comes with you with some trauma, you don't know when there's things like projection, transference, and all these basic psychological stuff happening. When what is unconscious, what is consciousness, what is so another very important part is that which branches out of this discussion, if I may, that there's causality, which is A happened, B happened, C happened. Sticking to the topic, also after before branching. So A is pushing on B, and C is pulling on B. Right? So if your karma from the past is that I kicked that guy in the face, let's take a violent example for some reason. Uh, if someone, if you kick that guy 10 years back and now they want to kick you back, they're coming to kick you, but you've envisioned a peaceful you. And even though in one of the timelines you were supposed to get kicked and your violent self would kick them back and you go into a loop, you envision the sea, you shifted the sea. So when they kicked you, your vision pulled you in a different timeline. You see, so it's then it becomes non-linear. Then it becomes like, okay, now this thing that is happening to me. So there's one thing in causality that uh, in a Vedic astrological context, that if I kill a dog, I'll have to become a dog in the next life. Things like that, So this is very popular in India. It doesn't work that way. It's rooted in energetics. So we don't understand. I mean, I don't understand where it is exactly, how these energetics working, like how much violence is created, how much energy is released in that part, and how it will come back in a different form that has to be consumed back because it has to remain in an equilibrium. The universe has to remain in a state of equilibrium. And now when there's a nuclear bomb explosion, the ripple effect is much larger. So higher the violence, the longer it takes to recover.
Yeah.
You kill people, the longer the time, it's longer than when you kill chickens or cows and stuff. And then it's ants and stuff, it's lesser, mosquitoes, ants and stuff. And with vegetables, it's the least. And then breaking rocks and stuff, it's the least. And then kicking yourself in the face is actually it's pretty violent also. Hitting yourself is pretty violent. Self-compassion is part of it. So this linear thing, we need it. We need it because it's simple. Now, complexity doesn't mean complicated, but simple can mean simplistic. So simple and simplistic are different, and complex and complicated are different. So we really need to be clear on these terms. Otherwise, what happens is people say, we use it like how we just, it's too complex. It's amazing that it's complex. Good that it is complex. It's not to be used as a derogatory term. And simple is used as simplistic. But it's actually it's so complex that you simplify it to its essence. So they're connected. Simplicity and complexity, they have to like sort of work together in tandem. So we need this idea of like linear causality. Like I did something bad, so something bad is happening to me. Right? But I did something bad, but something good is happening to me because I envisioned a reality in my mind. If this is a dream, then I can envision a reality, a dream so concrete that I can alter the course regardless of me getting that back in a good way. So that
So
bad
you're
that
saying it's like training wheels or something, that the linear illusion that we have, or the linear way of encoding our thinking, is like training wheels that helps us understand our karma.
Yeah.
But that really the truth, or we are evolving beyond those training wheels, but for a time we needed them.
Yeah, exactly. And that's when there are no mistakes if it's transmuted into wisdom. So if you make a mistake and you envision a future where you're going to a better space because of those mistakes, are they mistakes? It's a philosophical question then. I mean, if it took Buddha to leave his family and his newborn child to have an effect on the entire collective consciousness for the next 2,500 years, can you argue that it was the wrong move to like leave his child?
Right.
And eventually he says, I mean, you can do it without leaving your child. That's what he also says that. Eventually,
Oops.
but
Oops.
Yeah.
No, I like what you're saying, and I think I'll add on to that a bit because I think of it as, so you have these like karmic loops and everything, and you can stay in this vein, and that is embodying that frequency, right? So the minute you decide, you know what, I'm going to envision a concrete reality over here that, regardless of what I did in the past, I'm going to envision this concrete reality. What you're in essence doing is you're shifting your frequency to this level. That's all you're doing. And so it's like what I tell people, you can do a tug of war, people pulling on the rope, right? So we've got this person. What happens when you decide, I'm not going to do this anymore, and you drop? There's no resistance.
Yep.
You go into a different vibrational reality.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. It's possible to step out of the karma and by selecting a different reality. And so I definitely see the power of that. And sometimes it takes just someone being like, wait a second, you're holding up your end of this. What if you just drop it and go somewhere else?
Yep.
Yeah.
So there's like this such power in that from a psychological perspective.
Now, there's a small twist for us astrologers. This is the sites that we have, and this is what we need to apply a lot. This is the tool. And what we are saying works for people in a different state of consciousness. It works for people in Jupiter periods. It works for people in Venus periods. It works for people in periods of planets where Rahu periods, they're evolving. But if the pressure, if the force of demerit, of misdeeds, you can call it, ignorant deeds where you didn't know any better happen, if the force is too strong, there will be retribution. So there is an ordering principle. So the whole manifestation philosophy, and I like how even Ryan talks about it. He talks about like it works really well when you have your fifth house lord in the fifth with Jupiter or something like that. And when like I envision and I manifest, I'm into this sort of process, and good, that's working for you. And there's no need to like tune out of it because it's working for you and getting the survivor guilt, which we get as in better phases. There are other people, and people start feeling survivor guilt, what Freud used to call.
Yeah.
That
So
why am I
don't
better
feel
off?
guilty if you have a great fifth house and it's working really well for you. Keep going.
Yeah. Keep going. Yeah. Exactly. And then so here's the eye that we have. We need, as astrologers, it's very useful to understand what language a planet talks. So if you're talking about dropping, releasing, you need Jupiter inside. You need the person to like have thunderbolts or flashes of insight in front of you. So if they're working with their Jupiter and stuff like that is happening, they'll get it. Like especially in D24 and stuff. If that D24 has like an exalted Jupiter, not exalted. I mean, even if it's a friendly Jupiter, it works.
And you also need your Saturn to say, I'm going to eliminate this. I'm walking away. Peace.
100%.
Out.
Out.
You need the kind of two together.
Yeah.
That's a very good point.
I would
actually.
agree. And it is interesting because in Vedic astrology, it is about this concept of the planets seizing you. And so you do have to have, it seems, the correct, dashas coming up here so that you can do that. Wait a second, I need to do something else. Otherwise, you can get quite stuck. And is it the planets seizing you, or is it you making that decision? And so it's kind of, go ahead.
That's the question.
That's the
Yeah.
infinite regress of causality. And
I've got
that's
a
what
podcast for that, Ida.
You do?
that's
Yes.
that's why this is such an interesting topic of causality is like the biggest issue that all philosophers have been trying to like figure out. And I think the answer lies somewhere in the middle because the answer is complex again. It has to be, and it's a mixture of both. It's like, first of all, when we say I am the doer or I'm being seized and being done, who is the I?
Mm.
That I is the sun. So sun is called the Atman, and sun means self. It's the soul. It is the consciousness. It is the experience of reality itself.
Mhm.
Like everything is contained within the sun.
Mhm.
So if you have a cupboard, if you have a lamp, and if you have this bottle of water, all of these things are a planet, right? The wooden things are a planet. This glass bottle is a planet. Everything is being manifested through the vibrational frequency of a planet. Sun is within which everything is experienced.
Mhm.
Jupiter is the space. It's the Akash which is holding these things together.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's the ether element and the
Yeah.
experience of the ether with all the planets on top of it is sun itself. So the moment the body is dropped, everything is dropped, the consciousness remains. And that's when we have a weak solar power, we are under fate. Things are happening to us. Actually, we are not reacting to them too much because of lack of soul power. And what happens is we begin to have enough data, sensory input to be completely be convinced that uh, life is all about fate. So it's a philosophy required in that moment that everything is karma. When you do something and it doesn't go according to you, according to your solar vision, like an insight. I think if I do this will go like this, but it doesn't go that way.
Mhm.
That means keep losing soul force, but it's not actually being lost. It's a sense of being lost, and that becomes a philosophical thing. And then when we say I am doing things, that's more free will. So people with exalted suns usually are strong proponents of free will. People with debilitated suns are strongly they completely understand the idea of fate, like sun and
Oh yeah.
because they
Yeah.
have a social role to play. The Venus will take them to places. They'll be put into places where they had to be the okay, my boyfriend has come. I have to be the girlfriend for him. Now I have to be this for him, and now I need to go to this social space where I need to fundraise for this artwork. And then Venus is constantly doing. Sun in Libra is constantly doing its Libran duties, and Sun in
Mhm.
Aries can go along its own path. So all these philosophies are just perspectives according to different planets. You go to a martial arts training center and you're talking to martial philosophies. Like you get kicked, you get up. You never back down. So they have these statements. It's everywhere. Wherever there's Mars, there's this kind of stuff happening. And people
Yeah.
everywhere. So
Those
that's
military inspiring posters. Just do it.
yeah, yeah.
Drop and give me 100. Then tell
like
me how it is.
like how Ryan, when I told him I really need strength to finish this essay, I'm like really bogged down. So he's like, strength you have. That's all.
That sounds like
Um,
Yoda to me. Strength.
Yeah.
Hey, it's so great talking this all over with you guys. It's something that we could talk all evening, all afternoon, and all morning. In fact, Ida's the only one of us who's actually got the day in front of her to talk about this for all day. But I should bring it to an end. And thank you guys very much for joining me. I loved where you were going just then, Sachin, of it's the middle path. It's somewhere in the middle, because as I recorded this podcast, how does astrology work? You know, I went through this perspective and this scientific article and looking at that paradigm, and somewhere like 40 minutes into the 44 or 45-minute podcast, I go, so we don't know how astrology works. I kind of felt like I'd kept that showstopper, you know, hidden.
I wanted to say this because I want you to have this perspective. So science is not actually sure how many drugs work. So even Tylenol or paracetamol, acetaminophen, these kinds of drugs, we don't know all the mechanisms of action. Yeah. And so what we do know is that, you know, that has been a tried and true. It works pretty well, yeah. Right? And so the reality is that if you wait for the evidence, even science doesn't do that. They sort of just experiment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's really what I was going for in the podcast as much as possible, was to help us see that the lens that we use to box astrology, not astrologers, but lay people, the lens that they use to box astrology into something that's a pseudoscience, or that it's unprovable or it's not falsifiable, therefore, you know, it's I wanted to just highlight that exactly what you're saying. There are so many things that are scientifically endorsed that we don't understand the mechanism for either. And it's a little bit of an illusion in the West. You know, we're really indoctrinated into thinking if it's got, if someone with a PhD wrote it, or it's been endorsed by the National Administration of Health, or whatever your own country has as its, then therefore we know it back to front, inside out. It's completely 100% known, examined, truthful. And we're a little bit, as Westerners, we've got like one eye, we go blind to science. We're like, yeah, but that's fine. They know what they're doing. And with astrology, we've got this other eye of, you know, you've got no proof. And so I was trying to play with that. Yeah. So I really appreciate you guys being here for my very first after show for the Vedic Astrology podcast. I hope that you will come back and join me again. I've got a really exciting episode for episode 3, is all about Ayanamsha. It's all about Ayana Bala, and how we experience that declination energy from planets when we're in the Northern Hemisphere and when we're in the Southern Hemisphere. So perhaps I will see you again very soon here on the Vedic Astrology After Show video.
Thank you so much for having me. I would love to come back again. I really enjoyed this conversation. And I just want to say that it really isn't whether astrology works or how it works, but does it work for you?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Ida. Yeah. And Sachin.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Yes. Really nice seeing you guys. Really nice meeting you, Ida, and really nice seeing you, Fiona.
Yeah.
Hope to see you for another interesting conversation.
Great.
Delighted. Yep. So delighted. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm just blown away by what you're doing here, Fiona. I'd love to come back. I'm just wonderful, lovely work here.
Great. Good. That's what I need. My community here on the panel to help us enjoy even more the podcast. I love it. Thank you guys for making the time. All right. And I'll see you all again next time we get together for the Vedic Astrology podcast after show. Bye.